Hello everyone, UrfG here with a review for Urban Myth Dissolution Center, an investigation visual novel style adventure game developed by Hakababunko and published by SHUEISHA GAMES, available on PC, PS5, and the Switch. Like the title implies, the cases you'll be tasked in dealing with will have urban myths at the heart of each of them. It'll take your sense of logic and ability to investigate in multiple ways to identify and dissolve the mysteries you'll come across. During the opening cutscene, you'll be introduced to Azami Fukurai, a university student who visits the Urban Myth Dissolution Center to seek help for her ability to see ghosts, where she meets the center director Ayumi Moguria, who explains that he shares the same strange power. While this visit doesn't help get rid of her reflection, she does receive a pair of glasses that helps her focus on these ghostly figures that the director explains aren't actually ghosts, but visual representations of past people and objects, and refers to this ability as clairvoyance. After a series of events beginning with the cursed chair, and due to her clairvoyance ability that I'll explain more of later, she'll be employed by the UMDC to handle on-site investigations in place of the director. The game does go through a pretty straightforward introduction sequence that explains many aspects of on-site investigations, which ends with the director giving you a handy, useful journal, but you begin most cases on the hunt for information through social media research. These phases of a case has you joined by Yusumi Tomoriki, or Jasmine as she prefers to be called, your driver and partner for social media research and on-site investigations. Although one of your goals in a case is to identify the urban myth involved, you don't begin the social media research phases with zero information. Jasmine will usually suggest a relatable topic to research on social media, which leads to a common thread where you read through online posts to learn more details about the case. Examining each post elicits a response from Azami and Jasmine, but the purpose is to gain clues or to acquire search terms. On the top left of the screen is where you can see the number of clues you've obtained and the number needed to progress to the next phase of a case. Clues can be tied to a specific post, or after examining enough posts that leads to one. Not all clues are included in a single thread, so finding key search terms can help you uncover more in other specific threads with more relevant posts. These search terms are visible in posts in wavy letters, and putting on Azami's glasses lets you extract search terms for use in the search bar. Not all search terms are useful on their own. Some phrases can be too vague and end up with too many results, but you can combine two terms together to narrow the search. Yet some combinations can lead to no hits, and if you feel you missed something, you can switch between tabs to look through open threads. If you're ever curious about any clues you've acquired or other information in a case you've come across, you can always check your notebook to review what you found. When you found enough clues, you can advance to the next phase in the case, on-site investigations. Your goal for on-site investigations is still to find clues to advance the case, but instead of examining social media posts, you'll mostly be interacting with characters and objects, as now you can directly control Azami on the horizontal axis to explore the environment. Any tasks or guidelines you have will be shown on the left side of the screen, and interactable objects will appear in red and/or will have a visible icon nearby. Characters you can converse with will also appear in red, but will have a speech bubble appear above them when you're approaching. Interacting with characters can allow you to speak with them on various topics, and objects can allow you to undertake various actions. Speaking to characters and investigating the objects in the environment can open new dialogue options and new actions which can assist you in collecting clues. If you're not seeing new conversation topics or actions appearing, you can always put on Azami's glasses to use her clairvoyance ability. This allows Azami to interact with representations of figures and objects that have existed in the past that you wouldn't be able to see without them on, which can open up the investigation further to progress the case. Since these are just representations of past objects and people, Azami will interact with them similarly to other objects, but while she has the glasses on, she can't speak to characters or interact with the environment she normally could with them off. Interacting while having glasses on isn't a guarantee to find more clues, but it can lead to more topics to speak to characters about and actions to take for objects. A decent amount of time in this phase can be spent going back and forth between conversations and environmental interactions not using or using clairvoyance, but the game does more to add on to the engagement of on-site investigations. Meeting new characters and finding new information about them will prompt you to add their profile to your notebook. This is a pretty brief sequence that has you answer a question regarding something about their personality or other descriptor before proceeding. If you're curious about the characters you meet or the relationships to other characters in a case, you can review their profile in the notebook. You can also keep track of your clues during an on-field phase of an investigation, similarly to the social media research phase. Clues and character profiles are only kept track of on a per-case basis, and arguably your biggest use for them will come into play in certain scenarios, like when you need to form a hypothesis. After gathering enough information, Azami will need to form a logical explanation through what she's learned, with a prompt appearing for this on the left side of the screen. This puts Azami into deep thought, as she briefly goes through an overview of recent information you've come across. A Mind Palace version of the director also appears here to keep Azami focused. After the overview of clues, you're presented a word and phrase puzzle where you insert the correct words or phrases into the relevant portions of the puzzle. You have access to your notes during these sequences, so looking through them can help with the process. Making the correct hypothesis will lead to some form of case progression. A main part of that progression is to first identify what the myth surrounding a case is, and this happens in the stylish identification sequence. In these sequences, the director will help guide you through a series of questions that go over what clues you've discovered. Answering a question correctly moves you on to the next, and if you're having trouble deciding which option to choose from, your notes are available to look through for hints. After all questions are answered, you'll identify the myth, and soon you'll be moving on to the next part of the case. That next part of a case generally puts you back into the social media research phase. Since the myth has been identified, the clues needed can vary between cases, but the overall gameplay structure of finding clues through posts and search terms remains the same. Finding the necessary amount of clues leads you back into the investigation phase, where you'll be able to investigate new locations, question new characters, and interact with the new environment, also with the use of clairvoyance. This can vary on a case-by-case basis, as chapters can have multiple social media research and investigation phases before you're able to dissolve the myth. The dissolution of a myth is handled equally as stylish and is functionally similar to the identifying sequence of one. The director is still there to guide you through a series of questions where each correct answer progresses the dissolution. You're still able to access your notes, and answering all questions leads to the dissolution of the myth. The gameplay from a chapter does end after dissolving a myth, though cases and their endings can vary quite a bit, and even though some may not have the resolution you'd expect, they each do feel complete on their own. There is an overall story arc that connects each case together, though there was also more that was keeping me invested in Urban Myth Dissolution Center. The first myth you dissolve about the cursed chair kind of speeds you into using clairvoyance to showcase its function, but there's an impressive amount of polish I found in the production. For starters, I really did look at every post in the SMR phase to see the reactions of Azami and Jasmine, even after I found the necessary amount of clues to advance to the on-site investigation phase, as they have separate reactions for every one. I also felt there was a lot of detail that went into the other parts of these segments, like the separate avatars for posters, artwork specifically for these sections, or how the search terms work, and that attention to detail carries over to so many other aspects of the game. Character sprites in an investigation are distinct and easy to tell apart. The many conversation art of the characters you'll see during the chapter are all handled beautifully, and that remains true for the excellently animated cutscenes. There's also the amount of supplemental art that you can easily pass up, like the art that you can see in the Urban Myths pages in the journal. There's a good amount of musical themes depending on instances in the game, like one for riding in Jasmine's van, or the separate investigation themes when clairvoyance is off or on, with the dissolution theme being one of my favorites. The gameplay loops of collecting clues by going back and forth between speaking with characters and environmental interactions in separate phases may get repetitive, especially after doing it multiple times in a chapter, but the separate occult and urban myth theming kept the cases varied and interesting enough to keep me engaged. And there are segments like adding a character's profile or forming a hypothesis that did add to the gameplay variety before an identification or dissolution sequence was going to appear. Keep in mind that none of these gameplay sequences have any penalties for getting questions wrong, and there aren't any fail scenarios either, just in case that does make a difference to anyone who might or might not be into heavily story-focused games. There's also no real replayability factor here. Even if there was a chapter you wanted to replay, the lack of multiple save files and no chapter select option means that you'd have to replay the game each time just to return to a particular case. That being said, I don't really think the small amount of drawbacks that I experienced with Urban Myth Dissolution Center outweigh my appreciation for the many positives it has to offer. The production really feels top-notch with so many things that I've recommended to anyone interested in heavily story-focused game genres. Its fascinating narrative, focused on the occult and urban myths, also presents other complex and mature themes that I think can appeal or connect with a lot of people. But that's it for me. Let me know what you think below. Thanks. Bye.